know, man. I think if you start carrying a Gom Jabbar, that's like murder.
I didn't ask if it was murder. I asked if you had a guy.
Oh, yeah, I definitely have a guy.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
What ho, gentlemen? Mush!
Oh, right. Okay, recording day. Neat.
Yeah, right. So, Tom and Eli, I'll bite. What is with all the snow gear?
We are going on an expedition.
Don't talk like that.
Yeah. So you know how this week's episode is about the Mawson Expedition?
I do, yes.
So we were thinking, why just talk about it when you can, do it?
Do it. Exactly. Yes, it will be death-defying, epic, and we might not all come back alive.
Guys, I appreciate the commitment, but we're not going to explore the great white anything from the studio. Plus, we have like jobs and stuff. Like
You and Tom have jobs. I can do this if I need to.
Okay, that's fair. But like, it's cold up there, and there are absolutely zero snacks.
Wait. No snacks at all?
Zero, buddy.
No snacks at all.
All right, Bosnick, plan B.
Yeah, we have no choice.
What's plan B?
We're going to tell our wives what we think of their friends.
Oh, gee, I would stick with the snow
Definitely
thing, guys.
stay with the snow thing.
Hello and welcome to Citation Needed, the podcast where we choose a subject, read a single article about it on Wikipedia, and pretend we're experts, because this is the internet, and that's how it works now. I'm Eli Bosnick, and I'll be leading this band of brothers, but first, I'll need some fast benders to help me along.
What?
Michael Fassbender was in Band of Brothers. First up, the grizzled sergeant. I promise it gets funnier. The other guys talk and it's funny. If it's your first episode, just hold on with me. First up, the grizzled sergeant with a heart of gold and the golden sergeant with a heart of gristle, Cecil and Tom.
Okay, maybe true, but there's literally no way Tom and I are the same rank. Okay, there's no way.
Okay. All right. Still better than Commander-in-Chief with the golden shower.
Yeah,
That is true.
That is true. That is true.
And also joining us tonight, a man whose nickname on the front line would have been problematic on multiple levels, No Illusions.
So at first, I thought you learned about my childhood nickname, No, We'll Be Fine, the ice here is really thick, but now I realize you're talking about my nom de plume.
Before we begin tonight, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. Patrons, truly, there is no expedition as foolhardy or dangerous as having a baby while making your living based on strangers who pay you for the free thing you give away.
That is true.
Thank you for not serving me my just desserts. And if you'd like to learn how to join their ranks, be sure to stick around till the end of the show. And with that out of the way, tell us, Noah, what person, place, thing, concept, phenomenon, or event will we be talking about today?
Well, today we're going to be talking about the Mawson Expedition.
And Tom, you sat in a chair of fine mahogany and leather while thinking about this topic.
I did.
Are you ready to take a long pull from your pipe and regale us with a tale?
I am foolishly, tragically optimistic about the success of this episode.
All right. So, Tom,
Yes.
what was the Mawson Expedition?
Well, to understand the Mawson Expedition, you have to understand a little bit about where it came from, or better yet, when it came from. The age of exploration that marked the early 1900s is a period of time and a cohort of men that never ceases to fascinate me. There's something so incredibly human about the need to explore, to map, and to claim uncharted territory that frankly thrills me. The need in some men, not just to wonder, but to know, and to satisfy the need to know with the actions of their bodies as much as their minds, leaves me in awe. It really does. And I am just as much moved by the incredible folly and hubris that motivates this urge as I am by the optimism and pluck which accompanies it. There is something uniquely jaw-dropping to me as well about the explorers of the vast frozen wastelands of the Arctic and Antarctic. These massive tracts of unforgiving snow, ice, and sea are so inhospitable that it stretches my mind nearly to the breaking point to consider what a man must be made of, both for good and ill, to set off on foot across these stretches of icy hell to satisfy a drive to know and to conquer. And no expedition that I have read about quite captures the contrasting motives that motivates men as much as the Australasian Antarctic expedition.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
I want to point out how many fewer words "I want to fuck Edmund Hillary" has in it than that intro. I'm just saying you used to say the same thing. Fewer words. I'm pointing it out if you're in a hurry.
Also, not for nothing, Tom, but we have mapped out less than 10% of the ocean. So, hop in a submarine, you get to hang out with James Cameron. I'm just saying, buddy. It's out there.
I would rather trek across that ice, Eli. I would rather trek across that ice.
We have coats now. We could do it.
And to further understand this expedition, you have to know who led it. Ill-fated as it may have been, its leader, Douglas Mawson, was no stranger to the dangers and travails of Antarctic exploration. Before he set sail on this particular voyage, Mawson had already cut his teeth accompanying no less than Ernest Shackleton on the Nimrod expedition just a few years earlier. Mawson had already covered over 2,000 miles of frozen Antarctic waste on sledges. He'd achieved great success in his scientific activities, including taking magnetic observations, oceanographic measurements, and meteorological measurements, and was, at only 30 years old, widely regarded as one of the greatest geologists of his generation. So a quick word about those meteorological elements. I'm going to return again and again in this story to the utter brutality of the elements because the conditions in Antarctica are so severe. They are in many ways their own character in this story. But I want to quote a little here from the article I found on the Smithsonian about this expedition to give some flavor of how cold things get. As Apsley Cherry Gerard with the Doomed Scott expedition, which I'm also absolutely doing an episode on, noted about his own teeth in the weather. Quote, the nerves of which had been killed and split to pieces by temperatures which regularly fell as low as 77 degrees below Fahrenheit. That's before wind chill.
Hey, guys, old-timey guys, if it's so cold outside that your teeth explode, maybe you just wait a couple hundred years for some snowmobiles, right? Maybe you just wait.
So I know you didn't mean to imply that we'll get around to inventing those in 2113, but that is what you implied.
I'm willing to wait.
We're on the verge of that technology.
I'm willing to wait. Are they heated? Can I have snacks? Are they self-driving?
And there was always wind in Antarctica. In fact, on the coast of Commonwealth Bay, where our story will begin, the average wind speed, not gusts, the average wind speed is 50 miles an hour.
Jesus Christ.
It's crazy. There's a picture of a guy leaning forward at about a 25 or 30 degree angle, just trying to walk. It looks insane because the wind is so nuts. Gusts were recorded to top off at 200.
What?
For a sense of scale, a hurricane becomes a category 5 when winds reach 157 miles per hour or greater. So imagine then these winds with an air temperature dozens of degrees below zero, just pelting snow and ice in near constant blizzard conditions with the force of a sandblaster.
Guys, hear me out. Let's just wear wingsuits, jump once we cross the entire Antarctic. What do you say?
We could use a balloon. It'll go great.
So once more, a touch of context to continue to set the scene. This story will take place in 1913. So there are not synthetic moisture wicking fibers. There's no ultralight super polymer insulating technical winter gear. Hey, there weren't even densely packed high calorie foods like we have today. The explorers of the early 20th century would endure the harshest possible conditions on the planet wearing wool clothes, which absorbed the snow, sweat, and moisture, lost its insulating properties while also becoming heavier and stiffer. Their high density fuel of choice to eat was pemmican.
Ew.
Pemmican is a mix of rendered tallow, dried meat, and some berries, described as having a foul and greasy taste and texture.
Okay, again, it just seems like you wait till you have the stuff to do that stuff. We didn't try to go to space before we had spacesuits. This isn't hard. You need a thing.
Well, actually, Eli, there were several orbital missions.
No, we are doing a Tom essay this week. Means we're talking about cold dudes. You can do boring space next week when it's your turn.
You brought up space, which isn't at all boring. It's super interesting.
And also cold.
Yes, thank you. Tom.
We
and
found
warm
the
and
fuel
hot
essay.
and cold again.
This
Finally.
is our synergy point.
Is there a way to link an Etruscan in here?
We can get a cold guy at an angle. We've got 3/5 of this podcast set. A cold guy at an angle who doesn't like a book he hasn't read, and we're...
That's telling a giant lie. That's telling a giant lie.
We just make up the guy. We make up the guy. It's perfect. We found it, everyone.
So it was with this equipment and into these conditions that Douglas Mawson would split his expedition into 4 teams, nominating himself to lead what he called the Far Eastern Shore Party. This was to be a team of 3 men whose goal was to survey several glaciers hundreds of miles from their ship and base camp. This was by far the most dangerous of the 4 missions within the larger expedition. The goal of reaching the glaciers they meant to survey was impeded by a formidable landscape scarred with deep crevasses hidden by unstable roofs of deceptive white snow.
Right. Each of which had its own fire lizard. Stay home. You can't do this yet. You can't do it.
Would obviously be an ice lizard, Eli. Keep up. We're doing cold start this week.
So Mawson chose as his companions Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis as the dog handler for the expedition, and Ninnis's close friend Xavier Mertz, who is described this way in the Smithsonian article on this madness. Quote, Xavier was a 28-year-old Swiss lawyer whose chief qualifications for the trek were his idiosyncratic English, a source of great amusement to the other 2, his constant high spirits, and his standing as a champion cross-country skier.
I know, my teeth chattered themselves apart, and half the expedition shot into space like Mary Poppins after that 200-mile wind gust. But Mertz is trying to say squirrel, and it's really worth the trip, guys. It's worth the trip.
Because their party had the furthest to go, that meant they also had to carry the heaviest weight and greatest quantity of supplies and provisions. The men chose 16 Huskies and 3 sledges and loaded the sleds with 1,720 pounds of food, survival gear, and sciencey stuff. To keep weight as low as possible, each man was only allowed a very small number of personal items. Mawson brought a collection of Sherlock Holmes stories, his diary, and a photo of his fiancée. That diary would become an essential record of the voyage.
Really? I'm sorry, the Sherlock Holmes stories are kind of sticking with me. He thought he'd get bored and need some light reading as the wind tore the skin from his bones.
Why would, look, Eli, all 4 of us would panic at the thought of taking a shit without our phones. I feel like we could forgive this dude his one distraction in the infinite expanse of ivory.
Not tearing my flesh. Actually, you know what? I take that back.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
But the first leg of the journey went pretty well. The men made better than expected time after leaving Commonwealth Bay, and they covered 300 miles in just over a month. As the men moved deeper into the Antarctic, they were eating their way through their supplies, which made their sleds lighter and allowed them to pick up their pace even further. Everything was going exactly as meticulously planned. But since this is citation needed, this will be the last positive report about this journey that you will hear from.
All right. Well, it looks like this is shaping up to be the company road trip all over again. So will I get a toothbrush to scrub the salsa out of the car seats? We'll take a break for a little apropos of nothing.
You didn't even have any chips.
I said I was sorry. I apologize for this already. I have already apologized. Podcast listener, do you enjoy when we say mean things?
Would you like to hear us say mean things about the person of your choosing?
Well, you're in luck, because we are in the middle of our charity fundraiser, Vulgarity for Charity. We'll be supporting modestneeds.org, a 501c3 that helps people who aren't available for other kinds of assistance avoid poverty.
And there's lots of those people right now.
Really, so many of those people right now.
A lot, a distressing
honestly,
amount.
You probably don't want to think about it too much.
Yeah.
So here's how it works. Donate $50 or more at modestneeds.org and send us the proof along with who you'd like us to roast in an email to vulgarityforcharity@gmail.com. That's FOR, not the number 4.
Now, we're going to be choosing 100 random roasts to do on the air, but if you've got the cash to spare, we're also going to be roasting the choices of our top 100 donors as well.
Our goal this year is to break $300,000, and we're already got a great start with a $100,000 match.
And if we do beat that goal, Cecil will watch me eat an entire popsicle on a live stream without looking away.
I did not agree to do that.
Well, now I've said it on air, so it's true.
Well, no, but
Once again, head over to modestneeds.org. Do some good, and you'll watch Cecil watch me eat an entire popsicle.
But mostly you'll help people who really need it.
They can do it for whatever reason they want, Noah.
No, I guess that's true.
really, Noah, you too. You're gonna.
Well, it's for charity.
Such a big popsicle. Okay, so let's look at these resumes to see who we want to bring on our big Antarctic adventure.
All right, so this one here looks promising. Has a huge list of places he's visited with limited supplies, stranded in the Arctic for a few months, good ice climber.
Oh, that's fine, man. But, I mean, Mertz is kind of hilarious, right?
Mertz. I mean, he's fine, I guess. He doesn't have a lot of experience, though.
Counterpoints. Have you heard Mertz say squirrel?
No.
Hey, Mertz, get in here. Mertz, say squirrel.
Squirrel.
Ha ha! That is worth the ticket, my friend.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's pretty funny that he thinks that's, but like maybe we need somebody that can help us out if we get into a dire situation. Or...
Okay, you're telling me that Mertz saying squirrel isn't going to make any situation better? Mertz? Huh?
Squirrel.
See?
Squirrel.
See?
I don't know, man.
Mertz!
Squirrel. Squirrel.
Okay, no, admittedly, it's pretty amazing, but like, what about this guy? He has years of experience cooking dogs.
Look. Don't get me wrong. That's pretty great. But if we're in that much trouble, right? You know what'll be better than just a tasty dog?
Is it Mert saying squirrel?
Squirrel.
Exactly.
He can say other words besides squirrel, right?
I don't know that.
Squirrel.
Classic. And we're back. When we left off, Tom sat on a windswept dock whispering a song to men of valor who were about to fucking freeze to death. So, Tom, what happens next?
Spoiler.
Well, some of them freeze.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
He told us.
jumping
Gave away
ahead.
the ending.
Yeah. The lucky ones.
Well, Moss and his team started to become troubled by, of all things, a nightmare, a bird, and a dog-eat-dog moment. Mawson noted in his diary that he had an unsettling dream about his father, who coincidentally died a few days prior to the date of the dream noted in Mawson's diary. Ooh. The dream itself, yeah, right. The dream left Mawson feeling somewhat unsettled.
Old people die. Ooh.
In the 1910s.
1913. Exactly. Nonetheless, the dream left Mawson feeling unsettled. But all three men were well and truly shook when they discovered one of their dogs eating the pups that she had just delivered on the ice.
Oh.
Now, this is not actually entirely abnormal behavior given the circumstances. The dogs were themselves struggling in extreme conditions with far fewer calories than required, but the men were still weirded out nonetheless.
No, I get it. And I mean, imagine someone killing their kids without a podcast to listen to about it. Like, it gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it.
And the final harbinger Mawson noted was when an errant petrel, hundreds of miles from sea, came soaring out of the blizzardy hellscape to crash into the slide of one of the sledges. These incidents, Mawson wrote, quote, might have suggested to a superstitious man that something was amiss.
Errant Petrel is the name of my sea shanty singing group. That's 100%.
Okay, well, Dave Petrel is my transphobic stand-up avian persona. So
Wait, I'm
you
sorry.
could be my opener.
Yeah, there you go. Now, wait, so is it me or doth that diary protest too much? Right? Like, so like here are several omens that I don't find at all significant, but chose to write down through frostbitten fingers. Sure is a good thing I'm not scared of them. Like some big scaredy cat would be.
The men wouldn't need to wait long for these omens to come true. The crew began to run into terrible trouble as they moved deeper inland and began to cross the treacherous crevasses hidden beneath the snow. Ninnis nearly plunged not once, not twice, but 3 times into deep chasms hidden by unstable snow.
Hey guys, maybe I don't go in front for a little while. Can someone else go in front for a while?
Meanwhile, the cold and the wind had split Mawson's lips so deeply that great bolts of pain shot across the left side of his face almost constantly.
Yikes.
Ninnis also began to suffer from snow blindness. Snow blindness is actually a painful condition caused by a burning of the retina of the eye. He also got a deep abscess on the tip of one of his fingers. The pain from the abscess became so severe that Mawson was eventually forced to lance it with a pocket knife without any pain relief or anesthetic, though it seems fair to say that they had plenty of ice on it.
Just imagine that, lancing an abscess with nobody to watch it on TikTok, Eli.
Stop it, Noah. You're going to give me nightmares.
Now, on December 13th, 1912, the 3 men made camp on a glacier and took stock of their supplies. Having used up a great deal of them, they abandoned one of their 3 sleds and loaded everything remained onto 2. When the men bedded down for the night, they were disturbed by deep booms and crackles thundering from underneath them. Only Xavier knew what the sounds were, and he was terrified. The deep thunder rumbling from under the ice was the result of unstable ice beneath their feet. Quote, "The snow masses must have been collapsing their arches. The sound was like the distant thunder of cannon," unquote. The ground beneath them was shifting and changing, making an impossibly dangerous journey vastly more perilous.
Just wait till they have to jump over the fireballs and kill a giant turtle.
Yeah,
man.
right.
It's gonna get worse.
You think the ice levels are bad? Okay, so wait, but what did the other guys think it was? Hey, y'all think that's some ice nymphs doing the 1812 overture or what? Like, I mean, the only thing for hundreds of miles in every direction is ice. It's gonna be the ice then, right?
Also, there's only 3 guys. Is Xavier just keeping this to himself?
Yeah, right.
So the next day was Antarctica warm, a balmy 11 below zero. This warm spell was not good news. The relatively warm air further unsettled the frozen ground that they were traveling. After traveling for a time, Mawson paused his sled to take a sighting of the sun for navigation, and as he stood on the runners of his sled, Mawson took notice of Mertz, who, unburdened by driving a sledge, had gone ahead of Ninnis and Mawson to scout the terrain forward. Mertz had stopped his usual singing and was instead standing quiet and still with one ski pole raised in the air. This was their signal that they had encountered the precipice of one of the many crevasses crisscrossing their way through the landscape. Mawson looked back to Ninnis, who was traveling with their other sledge, to warn him of the danger ahead.
Shouldn't the "we're at the edge of a giant crevasse" signal not be a silent thing? Right? Like, pull in the air, that's great, but why not accompany that with like, "Watch the fuck out, guys, we're at the edge of a crevasse"? That should be part of the signal.
But Mertz was now looking back at Mawson in horror. Ninnis, his sledge, and his dogs had vanished from sight. Xavier and Mawson hustled a quarter-mile back to the last crevasse they had crossed, fearing the worst. Where just moments before both Xavier and Mawson had traveled without incident, there was now a void 11 feet across and impossibly deep. Mawson crawled on his belly to the edge of this new yawning nothingness and looked below. Far down, Mawson dimly made out a ledge with 2 dogs laying on it, one clearly dead, the other very nearly so. Beyond the ledge, there was what appeared to be nothing more than an endless, icy darkness.
Squirrel?
Not now, Mertz. Not now. That is super funny. That is super funny, but not now.
Using a knotted fishing line, Mawson sounded the depth to the ledge and found it measured 150 feet from the ground Ninnis had last stood. Ninnis himself, unseen, must have fallen even further on his plunge into the depths of Antarctica.
Jesus.
Mawson futilely called Ninnis' name over and over for 2 hours, hoping against all odds to hear a return call, but no sound returned his desperate entreaties. Ninnis was gone, and with him, one of only 2 sledges of the men's supplies.
I'm sorry, 2 hours? So he was like, "Ninnis, you okay, buddy? you survive 150 foot straight down fall, Ninnis? Better do this for another hour or 2 just to be safe." Dennis.
So things were not looking good for the surviving pair.
They weren't looking good for the non-surviving dude either, but yeah.
The supplies, when they had been split into 2 sleds from 3, they were not evenly distributed. Ninnis' sled contained most of their food and their tent.
What?
What did the other fucking sled have?
Well, yeah, I mean, like that one I get, right? The tent I get, because you're not going to be like, okay, let's put half the tent in this one, half the tent in the other one.
Cecil, you take 2 tents. You have a backup tent.
I guess that's fair too.
When you're in Antarctica.
Seems like a thing that you could do.
Without these supplies, Mawson and Mertz had only sleeping bags to protect the men from the terrible cold.
That's going to be
fine.
fine.
And food to last around 10 days.
That's going to be fine.
Yeah. In his diary, Mawson wrote, quote, practically all the food had gone. Spade, pick, tent. We considered it a possibility to get through to winter quarters by eating dogs. So 9 hours after the accident started back, but terribly handicapped. May God help us.
No. Okay? God helped you by making it tooth-explodingly cold so you would stay the fuck away. You don't get to ask him to lend a hand now. All right?
The pair made their way as quickly as possible back to where they had abandoned the empty 3rd sled the day before. From the sled, Mawson was forced to use his pocket knife to transform the sled runners into rudimentary tent poles, which they would combine with some errant canvas to create shelter. The men now faced 2 choices. Since they hadn't left any food depots on their trek inland, every moment spent was dire. They could try to head for the sea, where there was a possibility to kill seals for food, or retrace their steps. While the sea held the tantalizing likelihood of reasonably plentiful food, the route was longer and rescue even more uncertain. Mawson chose the path most recently followed.
Okay, you say every minute that they lost was precious, but like at least 113 of the 120 they spent yelling for Ninnis was like apparently expendable. It suddenly became precious.
What if he had yelled back? What would be the plan then?
Right, yeah.
He's got cool.
Yeah. We're gonna push a dead dog down your way.
I'll be back. I'm gonna go turn the other sled into a ladder. I'll be right back. I got my pocket knife.
I'm gonna get the whittle in here.
I'm gonna whittle an escalator. It's a lot of work otherwise. With the speed of existential terror pushing them, the men traveled relatively quickly for the first few days, but soon the elements began to take a terrible toll. Mawson went snowblind, staggering forward in the intense cold in unrelenting agony. Mertz tried to help his companion with a solution of zinc sulfate and cocaine, but the ordeal forced the men to slow their pace across the ice.
Hey, Mawson, if you pulled your face out of the bag of cocaine, maybe you'd stop seeing white, huh?
Yeah, Mawson's journal during this period was just filled with a bunch of stupid business ideas. It's not super useful to the expedition. Chuck E. Cheese for adults. That's Dave and Buster's, man. You're talking about Dave and Buster's.
At this point, the weather turned on them.
Well, yeah, it had been so helpful until now. That was bound to happen eventually.
The wind picked up even further, whipping bitter snow and wild gales, battering the men and causing a total whiteout. The men couldn't see beyond the reach of their own arms in front of them, making navigation hopeless and progress impossibly slow. The dogs started to collapse, and Mawson and Mertz had to hook themselves to the sledges to pull them across the ice themselves.
Weird that they chose to whip each other and yell, yeah, at this point. But they did. They did.
How weird is it, though, really?
And the food situation was spectacularly upsetting. So I do want to offer a bit of a warning here. The next bits are sad and dogs die. And if that bothers you too much, you might want to fast forward a bit.
Right, yeah. And if you fast forward and you notice the dog missing, it's just they went to a farm upstate. They're fine. Yeah. They made it out just fine, it turns out.
At this point, the men were reduced to eating the dogs as they died. The meat was even less palatable than the pemmican they had been relying upon. Mawson noted in his diary, quote, "It was worth the while spending some time boiling the dog's meat thoroughly. Thus, a tasty soup was prepared, as well as a supply of edible meat in which the muscular tissue and the gristle were reduced to the consistency of a jelly. The paws took longest of all to cook, but treated to a lengthy stewing, they became quite digestible."
Yeah,
quote.
that's good. Make sure you put down that the dogs are actually really tasty eventually. I mean, we'll want people to know it was yummers as part of our...
Leave it to the vegan to be unable to distinguish between quite digestible and yummers, but right. Good point, though.
Dog meat from dogs that had themselves likely died at least in part from starvation offered little to actually sustain the men, and Mertz began to break down. Again, in his diary, Mawson noted that Mertz, quote, is generally in very bad condition. Skin coming off legs, etc. End quote. So you know shit has gotten really bad when it's no longer even worth noting individually all the places that skin is sloughing off of your body.
Amazing.
And you go right to etc.
Yeah, etc. So good.
Mertz insisted on taking a rest, much to Mawson's protest, and the two took a day off from slowly dying while trekking to spend 24 hours slowly dying and sleeping.
Yeah. First one to fall asleep was also probably dead. But
At this point, Mawson seemed sort of pissy about being forced to slow down while Mertz had a layabout. He wrote, quote, things are in a serious state for both of us. If he cannot go 8 or 10 miles in a day or two, we are doomed. I could pull through myself with the provisions at hand, but I cannot leave him. His heart seems to have gone. It is very hard for me to be within 100 miles of the hut, and in such a position is awful, end quote.
Can you just duct tape some dog feet to your lower legs so we can get moving here, Mertz?
Come on.
Mawson was right to be worried. The rest was no help. Mertz did not wake rested and recuperated. Instead, he had completely lost his shit all over the inside of his sleeping bag. Mertz had become incontinent and delirious. Mawson had no choice but to spend hours cleaning the man and his sleeping bag and trying to get him warm.
I mean, not no choice, Tom.
I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But Mertz continued to deteriorate, succumbing now to fits. The men got moving again, but Mertz continued to have fits and fell into a delirium. The men made camp. Quote, at 8 p.m., he raves and breaks a tent pole, continues to rave for hours. I hold him down and he becomes more peaceful, and I put him quietly in the bag. He dies peacefully at about 2 a.m. in the morning of the 8th. Death due to exposure, bringing on a fever, end quote. That is what Mawson wrote, but what I think he meant to say was, became a pain in the ass, stunk up the tent, and broke the pole. I whittled myself with my pocket knife, smothered him to death, and took a very nice nap.
Yeah.
So Mawson realized there was enough dog paw for one of them and not both of them, and he said, I bet you wish you were the one keeping the diary now, huh, squirrel boy, right? Like that's what really happened here.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Yeah. Squirrel! That was look into your heart from Coen Brothers.
Mawson was now alone. No dogs, no men, and 100 miles of Antarctica between him and any hope of help. His own body was beginning to crumble. Quote, the nose and lips break open, end quote. And just in case you wanted to know if this was also taking a toll on his manberries, they were, quote, getting a painfully raw condition due to reduced condition, dampness, and friction in walking, end quote.
Yeah, you got to air them out. Yeah.
Jesus.
And when the balls start to go, your friends are dead, you're eating dog paw soup, and you're 4 marathons away from help, it seems pretty natural to contemplate giving up, which Mawson certainly did. He was prevented from the temptation to lay down and nap his way into eternity by thoughts of returning to his fiancée, who would be, I'm sure, pleased as punch to see his disfigured face and balls return to life.
Honey, everybody's heard your story about what dogs taste like. Let the Smithises talk about their vacation to Bermuda. It's their turn.
As desperate as he was to move on, the weather was so severe that Mawson was forced to remain in place with the body of his friend for several days, starving while the wind howled outside his thin and fragile makeshift tent. He spent his time in isolation using that same pocket knife I mentioned before to reduce the last remaining sled into a smaller half sled, since he now had much less to carry and couldn't afford the extra weight. With the break in the weather, Mawson began his lonely trudge with Rosebud toward a rescue he hoped he could find 100 miles distant.
Totally ate some of his friend during those couple of days, right?
Oh, totally, yeah.
And probably before he died, yeah.
It was sloughing right off anyway. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's like that cheese, that French cheese thing they do over the bread.
Raclette. Yeah. It's raclette.
Yeah, exactly. Yucky.
Unfortunately, after only a few miles, Mawson's feet began to give away.
Oh.
Each step became so painful he was once more forced to stop and investigate what fresh betrayal his body would reveal to him. Upon taking off his boots and socks, the sole of his feet slid off.
God.
What? How's
leaving
that?
a mass of raw, weeping blisters.
Nice.
Mawson had no choice but to slather the open wounds that were his feet with lanolin and then place the skin back across the bottom of his feet.
That's not how
and
bodies
bandage
work.
the skin
Yeah,
back
that's
up.
not how
No
bodies
choice. You keep saying no choice.
In his diary that night, Mawson noted, quote, "My whole body is apparently rotting from want of proper nourishment. Frostbitten fingers, festerings, mucous membrane of nose gone, saliva glands of mouth refusing duty, skin coming off the whole body," end quote.
Ew, he's turning into Steve Bannon. Gross.
Okay,
Is that what happened to that motherfucker?
it's not so much that this journey sucks as it is that 60 years later, me in a fucking snow car could make this trip in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Right? Just like the time I'm just, oh, cheesy poof. Nom, 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 nom. Sure hope I don't have to use my radio and have someone fly a helicopter here to help me.
Now, here is a good time for a moment of some speculation. At this point, Mawson and previously Mertz were pretty much living on husky meat. A good deal of speculation about what caused Mertz's sudden illness and the skin deterioration of Mawson suggests that Mawson and Mertz were likely suffering from an overdose of vitamin A, called hypervitaminosis A, most likely caused by eating the livers of the dogs. The livers concentrate the vitamin A in dangerous amounts. The symptoms of hypervitaminosis A include drying and fissuring of the skin, hair loss, nausea, and madness. All symptoms suffered by Mertz before dying, and many of these symptoms felt by the unlucky Mawson. Had the men eaten everything but the livers, they may have spared themselves death and untold misery.
So I guess what Tom's trying to stop in the middle of the essay to say is there's a right and a wrong way to eat a dog, people.
By now, Mawson could barely walk. He began dragging himself and his sled across the ice. Rather than covering his goal of 8 to 10 miles in a day, he was reduced to a literal crawl, dragging behind him his meager belongings. Still, he managed to cover 5 miles a day, an almost unimaginably difficult feat, but effectively doubling the time he was hoping to make. As bad as things were, they still managed to get somehow worse.
Zombie dogs. That's what I got.
It's a good guess.
Yeah.
Even crawling, the constant threat of a crevasse opening and claiming Mawson as it did Ninnis played havoc on Mawson's thoughts, and for good reason. On January 17th, his greatest fear was realized, and Mawson tumbled into a fissure that split and opened beneath his weight. Incredibly, however, the gap was just a little more narrow than the half sled that Mawson was dragging behind him. Mawson plummeted 14 feet before coming to a sharp, painful stop when the rope that joined him to his sledge held, and the sledge, just barely too big to slip down the hole, arrested his fall. Mawson, in terrible pain, was now suspended above a plunge to certain death, while above him he felt, quote, "the sledge creeping to the mouth. I had time to say to myself, so this is the end, expecting every moment the sledge to crash on my head and both of us to go to the bottom unseen below. Then I thought of the food left uneaten on the sledge and of Providence again giving me a chance. The chance looked very small as the rope had sewed into the overhead lift, my finger ends all damaged, myself weak," end quote.
But on the bright side, I thought, at least I don't need the sole of my feet for this bit. This is a hands moment.
Yeah, he's in a pretty bad state. That is until Patrick Swayze's hand appears over the edge and he says, "Not today, you son of a bitch." Everybody footloose.
There was no choice. To save himself, Mawson had to relive every high school rope climb nightmare and climb hand over hand 14 feet up the rope to the sledge and haul himself onto the lip of the relative safety of the precipice he found himself suspended within. Over and over, he climbed and slipped, falling and starting over several times.
Jesus Christ.
Until sensing his energy had run out, he managed to make one final push, heaving and crawling, hands and fingers slippery with his own blood. Quote, "At last, I just did it," he wrote.
Well, yeah, the fact that anybody read it kind of killed the suspense, bro. But sure, yeah, good for you. Good for you.
I could have found it as I was driving in my heated snowmobile.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's
past
true.
his body.
Unlikely, but true.
Ooh, a book.
He laid completely spent at the very edge of the crevasse, unable to move for at least an hour, before gathering enough strength to haul his sled over the void, erect his tent, and crawl inside his bag to sleep. That night, Mawson fashioned his rope tether into a rope ladder, so that if he found himself falling again, he would have an easier time climbing out. The very next day, he fell again, and the ladder he had made the night before certainly saved his life.
Tomorrow, I'm making that into a noose.
Right?
Absolutely making it into a noose.
Make Tom stop saying no choice, at least.
Yeah.
It's a little repetitive. Mawson was exhausted now, averaging only 4 miles a day. Before he was able to start out for the day's journey, he was forced to painfully dress and clean his many wounds, often finding himself spent and in terrible agony before his march across the ice had even begun. Once more, he was penned in by a terrible blizzard, but he could scarcely afford another delay. He forced himself to march into the storm for 8 miles before making camp for the day.
That sounds impressive, but some of the time the wind would have been at his back. So it's not. I'm not saying it's cheating. It's like cheating.
The incredible effort proved worthwhile. When dawn broke, he was close enough to see the coastline of Commonwealth Bay, his starting point, though it was still 40 miles away. There was a supply dump, now only 30 miles away, at a place dubbed Aladdin's Cave. He also spotted a low cairn not far off his path. Upon exploring it, he discovered that it was a cache of food and a note left by others from the original larger expedition, who left it in the hope that any of the 3 men might somehow still be alive.
Hey guys, hope your trip went great. Remind us to tell you about the night of too much mashed potatoes. Good times. See you back at camp. The easier expedition.
I love that they all put this like 30 miles out, which means they're like, go out and look for them. And if you don't find them, we'll leave them some food. They get 30 miles away and they're like, I don't see anything. Do you? We could barely even see our own camp from here. So
Look, I called for them for 3 hours. That's enough. That's enough.
The food cache and being within sight of his goal gave Mawson a much needed boost. And although it took him until February 1st, he reached the entrance to the Aladdin's Cave. Tucked away among the supplies were 3 oranges and a pineapple. Mawson broke down in tears at their sight, overwhelmed at seeing something which was not white for the first time in so many months.
No, I get it. I have the same feeling after I go to a podcast convention. I'm just like, oh, there it is. Something not white. Oh, there it is. Whew.
The elements were not quite done with him, though. Mawson, now tantalizingly close to rescue, was again beset by a terrible storm,
Polar bear.
which raged and penned him down for 5 more days. Moving as quickly as he was able, Mawson forced his way across the last 10 miles to reach the base at Commonwealth Bay just in time, no shit, to literally see his expedition ship leaving for Australia.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, I've had a bad month.
A small party had been left on shore in the hope that any or all of the men might return, but it was too late by a matter of hours to get on board the Aurora. Mawson was forced to spend a second winter in Antarctica before he was finally rescued.
Oh, all right. Well, Tom, if you had to summarize what you've learned in one sentence, what would it be?
Baby, it's cold outside.
Canceled.
Are you ready for the quiz?
Yes, I am.
All right, Tom. What's the best tundra cooked puppy preparation?
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
A, lab rangoon. B, beef and marley soup. C,
That was sad.
Savarin tin tin.
Yes.
Pekingese swa salad. Or
Yes.
E, Balto meal.
Balto meal is it's good. For undisclosed reasons, I'm choosing Lab Rangoon.
You are probably right.
You are right.
Drink your Rovertine. What does that mean?
All right, so I hate having to go after Cecil on puns. What song did Mertz usually sing when he wasn't signaling danger? A, back that crevasse up.
That's great. That's so good.
B, tundra pressure.
Yeah. This is both really good.
C, even flow, but the flow is a FLOE.
That's a gimme. It's a gimme.
Okay, or D, squirrels.
That's great. Squirrel. You got to sing it in your head to realize.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, squirrels. That was on the first cassette tape I ever bought. So that's got to be the answer.
That is correct. That's not why, but that's right. You nailed it.
Still the answer.
It's the only word he knew.
Right.
So.
All right, Tom. Mawson's diary is both fully available for everyone listening to this podcast to read and in the public domain. So it's free. They can just go get it right now. After all of that torturous effort and his entire life destroyed by this horrific experience, how many of our listeners are going to go read that diary? A, none. B, 0. C, well, I already listened to the podcast. Or D, should have stayed the fuck home, Bubby.
Jesus Christ.
Well, I'm uncomfortable even answering that question since you're taking a cheap shot at our listeners that is 100%
Right.
accurate.
Exactly.
So I'm going to
Hey,
abstain.
Anybody, if you read that diary, tweet at me. I will Venmo you $10. $10 to read the whole diary. Mwah, a $10 for $10.
No, he won't. He
wins.
won't do that. He won't do that.
Noah will
On
Venmo you
behalf of
$10.
Heath, I will announce myself as next week's essayist. Thank
All
you.
right,
Thank you,
fantastic.
Heath. Mine won't have any dead puppies in it, I promise, guys. I promise. There won't be any puppy cannibalism at all next week.
All right. Well, for Tom, Noah, and Cecil, I'm Eli Bosnick. Thank you for hanging out with us today. We'll be back next week. And by then, Noah will be an expert on something else. Between now and then, you can listen to our shows or arrange a thorough verbal trouncing for your enemies at modestneeds.org. And if you'd like to help keep this show going, you can make a per episode donation at patreon.com/citationpod or leave us a 5-star review everywhere you can. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, check out past episodes, connect with us on social media, or check the show notes, be sure to check out citationpod.com. And remember, if you donate enough money, Cecil will watch me eat a popsicle.
Why did... Gross.
Oh, Mertz. Mertz, you haven't long now, old friend. But I will continue for you. No, for us. Mertz, is there anything you want me to tell your family?
Squirrel?
Classic, so funny. Love it.
All right, Bosnick, plan B.
Yeah, we have no choice.
What's plan B?
We're going to tell our wives what we think of their friends.
Oh, gee, I would stick with the snow
Definitely
thing, guys.
stay with the snow thing. Jesus Christ.
Tom's like, hey,
This is like,
can
we swap that line out?
this is like
Maybe
a
a different line?
This whole show is just one big long divorce proceeding.
Man, I can't afford another one.
Another podcast divorce proceeding.
Jesus Christ.
Well, but every time the percentage will be of a smaller
Right,
amount,
that's
though,
true.
Tom. So it gets less and less
It's like
punitive
that
as you
arrow
go.
paradox.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
It's Zeno's divorce.
paradox. Yeah.